Hi everyone, my name's Alice from Discovery Eye. At Discovery Eye, we specialise in Power BI for the environmental and water industries. And in this short video today, I want to walk through how we can handle very detailed spatial files within the icon map. So I'm talking here specifically about tips and techniques of processing our WKT text strings so that they render within the icon map visual. So as you know, if you've been following along with the blog and YouTube channel for a while, Icon Map is definitely my favorite mapping visual in Power BI because it is so flexible and allows for so much customization, including the ability to add our own custom polygons and lines as WKT, or well-known text strings. However, a challenge that crops up time and time again, especially on the studies that I work in, is that my spatial files are very detailed, which can result in them not rendering within the map without a little bit of processing first. So the key culprit as to why they're not rendering is often that the WKT text string has exceeded the Power BI cell character limit. So the cell character limit is 32,766 characters for a single text value. So this might sound like a lot of values, but if we think about the structure of a WKT spatial file, it's really a lot of combinations of longitude and latitude pairs. And so if we have a really detailed boundary, something like maybe a river catchment or a very detailed waterway which is being generated by some automated processing, we can end up with a lot of text to define just one feature. So when Power BI actually imports this data from Power Query, we don't get an error. It just simply truncates the text value at that maximum character limit with no warning. So it can be quite dangerous. And therefore, it's not a valid WK text string. So those WK text strings just fail to render in the icon map. And we'll see that when we have a look at our data. So what we need to do is a clever bit of Power Query and DAX magic to make it work. But before we go into that, it's really good just to understand what options do I have. So if you've got a really detailed data set, what options do you have in your toolbox for processing and importing into Power BI? So in this example, I want to use a very detailed estuary drainage catchment shape file for New South Wales. So this is a freely available data set. I've downloaded it from the New South Wales Seed online database here. So I've included the link in the PBIX and the blog if anyone is interested. It's this estuary drainage catchment here. And you can download just the spatial file. Okay, so here we can see the file in QGIS, and you can see that we've got lots of different, quite detailed catchment polygons. For us to actually import and visualize this spatial data set in Icon Map, we need to first convert it to a WKT text file. So I've walked through this in a previous video, but we'll quickly do it again now. What we can do is just right-click on the shapefile. I'm in QGIS here, and we want to go Export, Save Features As. And just save it as a file name. I've got one here already. I'll just call this one Demo. So we're just saving it as a CSV file. The geometry, I like to specify the geometry type if I know it. So I know that this is polygons. And down here for geometry, we have to tell it that it's as WKT. And I don't want to add the save file to my map. I just press OK. And you can see the processing bar down the bottom, it's running, and that's been successful. So what I like to do straight after I've created my WKT is just open up Excel and then click and drag that file into Excel and just see what it looks like. So this is a text file, it's just a CSV file. And you can see that I've got this warning saying the data set is too large for the Excel grid. So okay, we can have a look at what's happening here. we can see that our text is too large for the cells within Excel. So Excel has a very similar text size limit. I think it's 1 or 2 characters higher or lower than Power BI, but we can see that it hasn't loaded correctly. So that's always my first checking point. If it hasn't loaded correctly like this, what I would always recommend doing, regardless of whether your WKT file is too big, is to have a look at ways of trimming down the precision. So that's our first tool in our toolbox that we've got. So if we have a look at the list here, we can reduce the precision. We can see that we have a lot of decimal points within this data set. We don't need 12 decimal points. It takes up a lot of characters. So I'd recommend truncating this to 4 decimal points, which I found works really well. So we can do this within QGIS using the Snap to Grid tool. So I'll show you that at the end of this blog for those of you who are interested in. The second option we can always think about is, can we simplify the layer? So if the layer has been derived from some algorithm, like a catchment delineation process, it can have a lot of vertices which add up. Every single vertice is a coordinate pair which adds up to the size of our text string. So definitely think about ways of simplifying the layer to reduce the number of vertices. So Map Shaper is a really good, free, easy to use online tool for this. So I'll show you how to do that at the end of this video as well, if anyone's interested. But really what I wanted to focus on today is having a look at the scenario where we have very long WK text strings and we want to try to import and concatenate them in Power BI and still plot our map, holding true to the original polygons. So we're going to have a look at option 3 in a lot more detail here. And for this, I've adapted the approach from Chris Webb's blog. Chris Webb went over a really neat approach of how to process large text strings, having a look at base 64 image data. So we've followed lots of the same principles here, but really applying it to WKT data. And I've had a look at something which is quite unique to WKT data as well. So yeah, it's a little bit different. So yeah, let's take a look. So let's have a look at how to split and then concatenate our long text strings in Power BI. So the first step is really to import our WKT into Power Query. So just make sure that this is closed here. And then let's go up into Power Query and connect to that data set. So I'm going to go New Data Source, a text or CSV file. And we'll bring in this demo data set here. And just hit OK. And we can see here we've got our WKT and lots of other columns here. Probably only for this example, I'm just going to keep the WKT, my object ID, and my catchment name as well. We don't need any of the other columns, so let's remove all the other columns just to simplify this a little bit. So what we want to do first is we want to split our text string. We want to split this column based on the number of characters. So if we choose this, the exact number of characters, I think it was in the order of 32,766, if I remember correctly, something thereabouts. I like to choose a really round number for splitting, just so I can check the text length and things like that. I'm going to split it based on 30,000 characters. I want to split it repeatedly and then expand our advanced options. So I don't want to split it into columns, which would insert a new column for every split. I actually want to split it into rows. So this will insert a new row for every time it splits or kind of every segment, every 30,000 segment of characters, it will insert a new row for us. So I'll just press OK. And we can see now that our data has been split. If we have a look at our object IDs here, we can see that for object ID 2, we've got 1, 2, 3 rows now here. So that means that it's got more than the 30,000 character limit. So we've increased our data set here. The last thing we need to do is we just need to insert a new column. We have to insert an index column. And this will just allow us to put in a sort order for our WKT to make sure that when we bring these text strings back together using CONCATENATEX, that we're able to sort them correctly. So really, that's all we need to do. We can just hit close and apply, and that will import our text data into Power BI. So we can start creating our icon map. Awesome, so we can see that that data has been loaded. We've got it here. The next step is to bring icon map onto your canvas. If you don't have icon map already, I've got mine pinned within my Power BI report. You can get it from the Visual App Source store, so you just click on the Get More Visuals and you just search for icon map. So that's the visual here. So icon map, it's an amazing free custom visual. It's created for free and just for the love of it by James Dales. And he's got a dedicated website, iconmap.com, that you can go to, which has lots of instructions, examples to download, lots of different videos. So I'd really recommend checking it out there. You can also buy James virtual copies to help kind of sponsor and just say thank you if you really do enjoy using this visual as well. It's an awesome visual. So now that we've got this on our canvas, what we need to do is we need to bring in a category and a size. So these are the two required fields for rendering icon map. So for category, I'm just going to use our object ID. And size, I'm just going to use the same thing. We're not actually going to use size with our WKT. Size is used for drawing kind of the size of points if we've got longitude and latitude, but it just needs it to render. Object ID, the reason why I chose this is it is the unique kind of key for every polygon. So even though I've got an object ID listed multiple times because I have split my text string up into segments, I want to stitch that back together soon. So that's why I'm using that field. That will be kind of my anchoring field in this visual. And then to render WKT, what we do is go into Format Our Visuals. Under Objects, we've got an option for entering an image or a WKT. If you press on the FX, this allows us to dynamically change this property. And let's first see what happens if we just bring in WKT. So we just want to bring in the first WKT and just see what happens. So here you can see that we are plotting some of our very smaller kind of catchments. These, I think, would be ones which just are able to be defined within the first 30,000 character limits. So if we just have a look at a table, let's bring up an example table to the side. Here I'm just going to bring in maybe my catchment name and the count of my object IDs here. Let's make it a little bit bigger. And we can see that some have a lot of data, so we really do need to simplify those. But we can see if we just change the interactions here. It's up here. So if we want to make this filter instead of highlight, just so we can see it a lot better, we can see that any of these ones which they're only listed once in the file, they render correctly. But any of the other ones, they're not rendering at the moment because we do need to stitch back together those WKT files. So how do we do that? So we've had a look at some Power Query magic using split by character. Now what we want to do is we want to have a look at some DAX magic. And this is where we're going to use a function called CONCATENATEX to iteratively concatenate our WKT data back together. So I'm going to insert a new measure into my table which has my WKT data. And here I'm going to call this maybe concatenated WKT. And I'm going to use this function concatenateX. So concatenateX, we can't really see the IntelliSense right here, but what it does is it allows us to iterate through a table and concatenate the text strings based on an order and also some sort of ID to link them together. So I think the first parameter is what table do we want to loop through. So this will be our S3 WKT demo table. The next item we need to enter in is our expression. So what do we want to concatenate together? This is our WKT data. What delimiter? So every time we concatenate a string together, do we want to have any sort of delimiter there? So we don't want to delimit, we don't want to include any custom delimiter. We really just want to piece this back together. So I'm going to leave that blank. The order by expression, how do we want to order it by? What we want to order it by is using that index. So we've got a field in our table called index, and we want to do it in ascending order as well. So now in our icon map visual here, if we go in and we edit how we're defining our WKT, this time we don't want to simply just choose the first WKT. What we want to do is we want to choose a concatenated WKT. And you can see now that it works. We can plot up some of these polygons which weren't rendering before. Because what we've done there is we've re-stitched back together our WKT file. So if I just clear this, we have to be a little bit patient. We've got a lot of data here that we're trying to ask Power BI to display. We can see that this is all of the polygons which are displaying. And if we go back into QGIS, so here, we can see that it doesn't quite match. I think we're missing this big one here. What's this one? We're missing object ID 367 or catchment name for Clarence River. So we're missing that there's a big hole here and there's another big hole down here. So yeah, what's happening? So let's have a look. Let's just check to make sure that's not here. It might be a bit easier if we insert a slicer. Maybe I want to put a search on this. We want to search for Clarence River. And you can see that this has 30 text strings all concatenated together, but it's not displaying. And this was doing my head in. I was like, oh, I followed all the steps. What is happening here? And it turns out that between importing our data in Power Query and then Power BI reading it, they read it differently. There's something weird happening when we're importing data from Power Query into Power BI when we have spaces at the end of text strings. So to try to investigate this, I had a look a little bit deeper. So if we go back up into Power Query, what I've done is here I've got just some test text. So if we have a look at this, this was just some data that I've entered in. using enter data, and it's just A space, B space, C space, D. And then if we go back here, what I did was I've split it into columns based on 3 characters. So it's the same step that we went through, but instead of 30,000, I have to split it based on 3. And then what I've done is I've added a custom column just to calculate the length. So here we can see our length is 3. Here we can see we've got a space, C space, and that has a length of 3. And here we have a length of 1. So nothing special is happening here. We're like, okay, that conceptually, that makes sense. But when we import it into Power BI, and then I calculate my length using DAX, what's actually happened here is we've got our A space B. That's got a length of 3. That's perfect. But this second row for C, it's actually removed the lagging space when I've imported it. And so I've only got a text length of 2. And this becomes a problem if by chance when we're doing our split, that 30,000 character limit happens where we are splitting it right before the minus sign between our longitude latitude pairs. So then we would miss out on this space here between the 2 coordinates, and when we stitch it back together, it will read it as an error. It will just be one long number with a negative and another decimal in the middle of it. So that's what's causing these errors. So I was very excited when I figured this out because we can do a little bit of processing to kind of find this error and then correct for it. So I'm sure there's a lot of different ways we can do it. What I'll show you here is how we can do it with a DAX calculated column. So I'm going to insert a new column here. And I'm going to call this one processed WKT. And I'll just do a simple if function. So you want to say if the left character in my text string here, so my text string is my WKT. So if that, and the number of characters, if the leftmost character, so the first character on the left, equals to negative, then I want to return a space negative. Oh, then I want to return a space, no, because we've already got the negative in there, and the WKT. Otherwise, I just want to return my WKT value. So all we're doing here is we're searching and saying if the first character is a negative, then I want to include a space and the rest of the string. Otherwise, just return that text string for me. So it is hard to check this data because our strings are so long. But the easiest way is let's go back in to our report here, and we'll just modify our measure now. And we'll see if those big polygons actually do plot. So this time what we want to do is we don't want to stitch together just our WKT column, but we want to do the process WKT. So this is the one where we included the extra space at the start. And hopefully we'll see these ones plotting up. I think we just have to give it a little bit. Yeah, exactly. So now we can see that we've got all of our polygons plotted together. So yeah, yippee, we're really excited that we finally got this stitched together. You'll notice but a lot of performance issues with this approach. So with a word of caution, I would only use this approach sparingly. Here we've done no simplification, we haven't reduced the precision at all, our file is really, really big, and you can see just how much Power BI is struggling. But I think this is a really useful approach, especially if you've got a file where just maybe one or two of your polygons or lines are just a little bit above that text string limit, and you want to preserve the accuracy of your data. This is a really good way to stitch it back together. But as I mentioned, there's other two methods of reducing the precision and actually simplifying your layers. They can be really, really useful techniques. So I'll go over those shortly to show you just a few other techniques. But as always, we'd love you to connect with the Discovery Eye team. We've got all of our links below. For those of you who are environmental kind of specialists or analysts using Power BI, we'd love you to connect and sign up for our Power BI for Enviros meetup group. So we meet virtually, try to do it once a month. And it's where we share different tips and tricks from across the environmental industry, all about how to use Power BI to visualize your data. Thank you so much.